right. Well, I think we should get started unless anyone has any objection to that. So first of all, I want to say just greetings to everyone and welcome to this session of the Generative AI Teaching Conversation webinar series. My name is Sean Leahy. I am the Director of Creative and Emerging Technologies at Enterprise Technology here at ASU, and I'll be your host for today. And I'd like to send a special thank you to the Provost Office for hosting this short 30-minute engaging conversation with expert panelists from ASU to provide an opportunity for faculty, staff, and students to engage in contemporary and emergent discussions around the use of generative AI in higher education. So for today's topic, we're going to be tackling sort of this big question about what are generative AI tools and how are they being used at ASU. So to do that, I'm joined by three amazing colleagues and experts here at ASU. Real briefly, I'll go around and introduce them, and then we'll kind of jump right in to our first first question. So first, I'd like to welcome Katina Michael. Katina is a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society and School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence at ASU. She's a senior global futures scientist, director of the Society Policy Engineering Collective, and founding chair of the Master of Public Interest Technology. She's also the founding editor-in-chief of the IEEE Transactions on Technology and Society and senior IEEE member in the Society for the Social Implications of Technology. So welcome, Katina.
Great to be with you, Sean, and team.
Excellent. Next up, we have Chitta Baral. Chitta is professor in the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence in the Ira A. Fulton Schools of Engineering here at ASU. He is also the chair of the graduate program in computer science. His expertise includes bioinformatics knowledge, representation, reasoning and declarative problem solving, and a systematic approach to designing and analyzing autonomous agents. Welcome, Chitta.
Thank you, Sean.
And of course, if I get anybody's bio wrong, you can use this time to correct that and set the record straight. And then last but not least, joined by Kyle Jensen. Kyle is the director of the writing programs and professor in the Department of English's Writing, Rhetoric, and Literacies program at ASU. His research explores modern rhetorical theory and rhetorical education. Kyle authored Reimagining Process, Online Writing Archives, and the Future of Writing Studies, and co-edited Abducting Writing Studies and the War of Words. So welcome, Kyle.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So we've got a lot of ground to cover and not that much time. So we're just going to sort of launch right in. And I think it would be best if we kind of start at the beginning. I think there's many people in our ASU community who probably have not really thought about artificial intelligence in their day-to-day life, unless they were perhaps already studying that or looking into it, until essentially late fall of 2022 here, when suddenly generative AI tools like OpenAI's ChatGPT and DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, Bing Chat, et cetera, were sort of thrust into the limelight of daily conversations that seem to permeate all sectors. And so I'm hoping, Katina, if I could kind of throw this one to you to get us started here, perhaps you can kind of just start us with this first question to help a broader audience, people who may not be coming from any background working with artificial intelligence, because that's such a big word that we kind of toss around, and try to help us all understand what are these things that we're calling generative AI tools, and then we can all start to chime in on some of those examples. So take it away.
Great question, Sean. I'm bursting to respond to that. So they're AI chatbots in essence. And we all know what Siri and Alexa are. So think about ChatGPT 3 or 4 or more as being an Alexa on steroids. So if we look at the definition, chat generative pre-trained transformer, it's a mouthful, isn't it? But let's start with generative. It involves applying a set of rules to linguistic input in order to produce coherent text. So I feed it something, it feeds me something back based on some rules. It's pre-trained because a model has already been created and trained on a large data set of existing text to solve a problem. So it looks at a whole bunch of text that exists, it's pre-trained as a model, and then it will use that model to give us something back. And it's a transformer because it is based on models that can be designed to translate text using what's called a neural network architecture. So it takes advantage of something called supervised learning and reinforcement learning. And in a nutshell, it's an AI chatbot.
Wow. Yeah, I think Katina, I think almost every word in that explanation, we could do another a webinar on unpacking all those. But yeah, so Kyle, Chitta, what are your thoughts about that? How do we define these things?
So I will start with the generative. That means it generates. So here, ChatGPT is focused on generating text, but there are other ones like DALL-E that can generate images. Then the GPT-4 version, I think it can generate text and images together. Actually, the GPT-4 can take input as images, but generates text. But actually, we are working on something which generates text and images together. So in that sense, it's generative. And if I go back to the AI part, when somebody asks what AI is, I kind of take the strip the A part and then just look at the intelligence part and say, okay, just ask a dictionary what intelligence means. And intelligence, if you kind of search in a dictionary, means like an entity is intelligent if it can reason, think, it can learn. So those are attributes and understand. And in this understanding comes the language understanding. And what has happened in these recent years is that this transformer-based architecture are very good at generating text. And they have been used for images. Actually, the images, there are some other methods that are used called stable diffusion and so on. But they're very good at generating text. So I will talk more as we go along.
Yeah, great. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
Well, one of the things I actually just got done teaching a class where we're discussing the history and evolution of artificial intelligence, particularly as it relates to large language modeling. Imagine that, right?
I mean, could you have planned that any better for today?
No, it's like we're coordinated, huh? And one of the things that I told my class today, because I'm preparing them to write argumentative essays about where the history of AI is leading us. So I want them to have a kind of a larger scope and a framework for making arguments about the present. I said, one of the things that's really fascinating about AI is that, especially with relationship to large language modeling, is that it's basically touching every single corner of our social life. I had a friend who came and visited us from Texas about 2 weeks ago. He's a construction worker and he's a really smart guy and he's a business owner. And he was showing me pictures of all of the really amazing work that he had done in the last couple of years. And I was asking questions about it. And then he sat and looks at me dead in the eye and he says, "So what do you think about this ChatGPT?" And I said, "Well, tell me what you think about it. Like, how are you using it?" And he proceeded to explain to me how he was using it to, help write contracts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not an engineer, I'm a humanities professor. So when I talk to engineers and I say, how do I explain this to people who may feel like they're not particularly connected with this kind of technology or it's really new? The engineer that I talk to says, it's actually pretty simple. It's a predictive model. And I think that's the term predictive is really, really key here, where what we essentially are doing is through a series of neural networks, as Katina said, an algorithm processing input and output. What the chatbot is essentially doing is it's predicting what the sentence should read like. So a good example is anybody who has ever tried to text on a cell phone has been typing out a message and the AI is saying, "Oh, this is what you should say," and you have an epic texting fail, a misunderstanding as a result of that leads to a ton of humor, right? That would be a good example of a weak language model in the sense that it's not predicting very successfully what should follow what you have already written. A large language model is the exact opposite of that. It's a kind of ASU scaled up version of a language model in the sense that it has so much compute power and it has so much coordination, and it analyzes such a great amount of text that it increases proportionally the probability that the next word is the right word, or at least in the neighborhood of being the right word. I think that's a helpful way to think about it, but I'm happy to, answer any further questions.
I think so too. And then, to the panel here too, as also in terms of, maybe it would be helpful for our audience too, to think about, where do these things get trained? Where does the information come from that, whether it's, again, depending on which type of generative tool, is it creating images or text, where is it getting that sort of corpus of data that it's using to make those predictions?
That's a great question. Many of us would assume that it's using the internet to trawl through. You know, behind me is Hayden Library. Think about ChatGPT or the GPTs and the generative AI as being libraries of libraries, systems of systems. Well, where is that data? We can look at examples like Clearview AI that trolls through looking at facial images. We started with 1 billion images, went to 3 billion, and then 10 billion. 10 billion images were web scraped by this small organization. And within milliseconds, being able to make matches to some fuzzy logic and proportionality to denote the identity of someone based on a hit. So imagine that at scale. How many words are there on the internet? How much can we scrape? Is it interconnected? Is it in real time? Now we know it's not in real time. The GPTs use data from 2021 and prior to that period. But do we have access to the log of information that has been trawled through and copied and cached somewhere? Is it happening in near real time? May we have tools in the future that use the internet like Clearview AI at scale, at real time? And what does that mean? What are the implications for sourcing different types of data, both this information and that information which is accurate? And so we know that the best of us is on the internet, but so is the worst. What kind of deep networks perhaps may we be going through? Already we have evidence that people have been paid to annotate bad questions on GPT. They were being paid $2 an hour to actually block those kinds of questions. So I would just say in a nutshell, what we need to do is to ensure authenticity, authorship, date of our sources, and we don't have that guarantee at the moment. We don't know what it's using, but we do know that there are deals being done with licensed providers like journal peer-reviewed academic papers and publishers, and that is playing out in real time. So will we pay free version, freeware, nothing? But if we want really legit content, we'll be going to the paid version that actually sources legit peer-reviewed database information.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. So let me throw this question out, because if people have been paying attention, or if you're starting to pay attention, to this whole landscape of tools, one thing that has been very notable is the speed at which new things are coming out, right? So, I mean, it seemed like a long gap between, when OpenAI, for example, launched DALL-E 2 over the summer, and then it was like this long fall, and then ChatGPT came out, and now it's like every day there seems to be new tools coming on the horizon as well. I mean, I even sort of likened it in an analogy to a sort of a Cambrian explosion of these AI tools. But interestingly, so back in February, I gave a talk around some AI technologies and in these sort of things, where I shared a link that was tracking how many tools are on the market. And I looked last night, and from February to now, over 1,000 additional tools have come out in roughly a month and a half. So with this rapid development, I would just be curious to get the panel's sort of input or perspectives. One, how do we stay on top of these things? And two, can we think about that? What do we think about that trend? So Chitta, maybe I could have you start with us on this one. How do we stay up with this rapid pace of innovation and new tools coming to market and new technologies coming in? How do we stay on top of this fast moving experience?
It's really difficult.
Can we
stay up to date with this? Like, the way I stay up to date is, I mean, Twitter is a good tool. If you are following some appropriate people, then you get quickly filtered news out of it. I get information from my students and from my reading of the newspapers and the Google News, all kinds of directions, and still I am behind. I'm a little more focused on the research. So in the research, when people publish papers, then subscribing to archive.org, that helps me. And then also Google Scholar regularly sends me papers that are relevant to me. So those are like technical papers. And for the news, actually Google News knows the history of what I read, TechCrunch article or this article they keep sending me. But still, it's very hard. Like, I was just talking to my student who was working at Microsoft, and he told me 5 different things that came out. And I'm like, I don't note it down. Okay, I need to look them up. So it's really hard. But I may say a little bit going back. Research was happening at quite a big space before, say, December. But the ChatGPT kind of making it a free access created a totally different phenomena. Before that, like GPT-3 was there, but because it was paid, a few people were using it, and it was not meant for average people. Means it had buttons which you have to understand what those buttons meant, and so they kind of eliminated everything and they created ChatGPT. And that created a big fear in Google because they hadn't, I mean, they have actually been doing a lot of research on this. Facebook has been doing a lot of research on this, but they haven't been, they are publishing, they hadn't had a ChatGPT like system. So they had to go overdrive, and they've kind of fumbled a little bit. Then now they have Bard out there, and now everybody is trying to get their system out. It's like the, if you think of probably much in steroids, like when the search engines came out, there are lots of different search engines came out, or lots of different kind of social media things, MySpace, this, that came out. But this thing is like probably 100 times or exponentially faster what is happening now.
Yeah, we need an AI to keep us up to date on all the advancements in AI.
I cannot keep up. I mean, I'm having a hard time. So
yeah, Kyle, I saw you on mute, so I'm like, you've got something to say.
I figured you would. Figured you were going to call me in here. I think what's been helpful to me, just as a researcher, so I've been interested in the implications of large language modeling for how writers conceptualize writing and how we conceptualize authorship for the better part of 7 years. So there's been technologies that have been in place in terms of that are large language model like for a good chunk of time. It's not terribly new. What's kind of amazing about it, I think, in the fall, as you mentioned, Sean, is that it's kind of reached a national scale or a level of national attention. And as I'm trying to keep up with it, one of the things that helps me at least anchor my perspective is not try to keep up with what's happening immediately, but try to understand where it came from. Meaning I need to have a better understanding of the problems and solutions that computer engineers have developed and over time in response to the limits in their particular approaches, because doing that actually helps me understand how we've gotten to the particular point that we are at right now. And knowing that a lot of these new technologies, they may be like apps, but the kind of basic logic of the operation is pretty similar. Like if you know what a large language model is, it doesn't really matter if you're talking about ChatGPT or WordTune or any other kind of writing technology, however they apply it or however it manifests in the app itself. We can debate and try and keep up with that, but large language models, I think, are going to be the kind of foundation or the bedrock for a lot of these, at least alphabetic-based AI technologies moving forward. And so learning a little bit about what large language modeling involves, knowing that really large language models have, up to 178, billion textual parameters. That helps to know that. It helps to know where they're drawing sources from, as Katina mentioned in her answer a little bit ago. And then trying to understand, well, what things do they allow and what things do they disallow? Because no model can, this AI independent, no model can account for everything. And so it has to make decisions. So then we can start to study that with a real focus. If we know a little bit about the history of it, we can know why certain decisions are being made versus others and where certain decisions might be headed based on the success rate of the past. So I don't know if that's a great answer. I mean, there's just a deluge of information. But I tend to find my source of comfort in history.
Yeah, interesting. Katina, anything to add to that, or?
Look, I love Kyle's response, and I'm just looking at scale at the moment, Kyle, apart from those so many variables and the decision making. 1 million people took up the app within 5 days. Here we're specifically talking about ChatGPT. Within 2 months, 100 million users.
Yeah.
Google Plus took 1.5 years to get to 100 million users. An estimated 10 million requests are happening per day, and access is an issue. Who has access? Sometimes we try to get onto ChatGPT and it blocks us, come back later. Why? So all of these things, when you're hearing young children talk about ChatGPT and how they can use it for their homework, or you're in the library and someone says, since ChatGPT came online, I feel much better because my writing and my assessment tasks that I'm submitting have improved. Now, they're using it as an assistive tool, not a replacement tool. They're augmenting their own intelligence. And this is the fine line of context that Kyle was talking about, and history matters exactly. And so does risk and harm. And I know we have a whole series to talk about this, so I'll leave it at that just from me for now.
Well, actually, Katina, that's actually that's like a perfect segue into sort of our last sort of a big question here to sort of tackle within the time we have is thinking about ensuring that we can use these tools or working towards using these tools towards their fullest potential, while also simultaneously, right? And here, there's the delicate line to walk, is also thinking about always minimizing the risk associated with those uses. And how do you maximize and minimize on different kinds of things? So, I mean, given the multitude of ways that these tools seem to be providing new ways of generating content, whether good or bad, how can we ensure that we're using these tools to their fullest potential while minimizing the risks associated with their use? So Kyle, perhaps I can sort of kick this one to you to start, especially given your background and, working with writing. I'm curious about what some of your initial thoughts are around this idea, especially since tools like ChatGPT have gotten so much press and perhaps even unwarranted or warranted, depending on the circumstance, around using generative AI tools that to either assist or replace writing. Like, what are your thoughts about this? Like, how do we maximize the use of these tools while trying to minimize those risks?
Well, I wish I had an answer, Sean. You're
Me too.
throwing some real softballs out here this afternoon. All right, so the way that I think about it, I'll just frame it as in my capacity as the director of writing programs. The way that I want to think about it is the way that I want my teachers and students to think about it, which is essentially, to what extent do these technologies do the kind of work that we would otherwise do if we did not have those technologies in place? So I'll give you a really common problem, and hopefully, the participants in this afternoon's session will nod along. I'm hoping my panelists will as well. Writing is just a fundamentally difficult task. And one of the really difficult things about writing is not only creating possibilities, but managing possibilities. Sometimes you don't even know what you don't know, and so you're writing in the dark. And what you're doing is trying to create the conditions where certain kinds of possibilities emerge through, reading other texts or trying to pitch your ideas against somebody else's. So my question when I look at these, the technologies that emerge from these large language models is, to what extent does it honor the complexity of the work of writing in the way that I understand it, independent of the technology itself? I want to know, is it actually representing or helping me augment the process of decision making, which I think is a really, really key decision, not just for professional writers, but for new writers as well. So when I look at a technology like ChatGPT, I think, okay, I given the writing parameters, and it spits out a whole text, and I can say, oh, well, that kind of works, and I can maybe make certain kinds of adjustments. But the presupposition is that I can co-opt the writing process for the writer. That doesn't concern me from an academic integrity perspective as much as it concerns me about what the expectations it creates about what the work of writing entails. Then you counterbalance that with a technology like WordTune, which a lot of people aren't familiar with because ChatGPT has been dominating the conversation so consistently. So what you do in WordTune is it has a search, it's a browser extension, it has a search bar. You type in a sentence, a word, a sentence, or even a whole paragraph, hit enter. And what it does with the large language model is it does what the engineers call a spray and pray approach. What it essentially does, it creates 10 to 15 different options that the writer may choose to incorporate into their writing, but it doesn't co-opt the writing process for them. And what my research with my students is showing is, in fact, they look at all of these different kinds of options, and it's not necessarily, they might look at them all and say, that doesn't exactly capture the argument that I want to make given my audience and purpose and situation. But having seen these options or these possibilities in place helps me refine what it is I want to argue. And so I think that's a really helpful heuristic for thinking through the value of a particular technology in a large language model is, to what extent does it assist the student or assist the writer in making more complex decisions that might otherwise be overwhelming or deter them from engaging in the writing process, versus what kinds of technologies just simply kind of like run in front of the writer, him, her, or themselves, and essentially co-opt it for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. Chitta, Katina, anything to add to that or to?
Yeah, I'll go.
Sure, please.
Yeah, it's good to hear from Kyle from a writing perspective. I just want to put some warnings. Is these language models are prone to what is called hallucinating. So if you want to, means they have read through things. I mean, I asked it to write a biography on my name, like write a bio for Chitta Baral. Half the time it killed me, saying I died in whatever year. And get
I'm so
another
sorry.
half the time it gave me lots of awards which I never got. So it's very careful. I think that Kyle mentioned the right kind of use, like you're writing sentences, a small things. If you expect it to give you a whole paragraph on something, you better read every line, and it reads very fluent and everything, but there might be, like in my case, my biography, it had about 70 to 80% error on my biography. And it's not very good at reasoning yet. And it can, because of it is the knowledge it has gathered, it can, that influences something you're writing, so it messes up things. So one has to be also very careful of the kind of being careful of how you use it. You definitely cannot be at this point, take the output at face value and send it. You need to read every line of it and make sure if it is correct or not.
I agree, Chitta, very much so. And this is where I always stress the importance of technology assessments. Giving my own school a plug, I am from the School for the Future of Innovation in Society, and also the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence. So futures and augmentation is where we're at. How do we harness the power of these tools? They're just more tools, but this one seems that it will have a significant impact on society. So the question is, how do we identify the stakeholders? And I'm not just talking about users and OpenAI and the makers. I'm talking about regulators. I'm talking about the general public. I'm talking about government, non-government organizations, not-for-profits, all of the ecosystem that this GPT will affect. I want to identify risks in context. So risks for one application of this amazing tool will be quite different for others. And where we can treat the risk and manage the risk, we go forward. Where we can't, we sort of acknowledge and retreat, or at least put in safeguards that may be regulatory safeguards. But at the moment, there's a lot about plagiarism and copying and copyright that has gone undetected so far in the discussion at large. And what we need to do is a proper technology assessment for different spaces and contexts. And once we do that, I think we'll have a better understanding of the ethical, legal, and social implications that we need to be better prepped for as we begin to integrate this tool into different facets of life.
Yeah, that's a wonderful sort of way to kind of wrap up our sort of our initial first session here as well. So thank you for that, Katina. I do want to just, we've kind of, we're really close to the end here. So I do want to maybe spare just a moment or two to open up for some question and answers, perhaps from the audience. I can see a few here, and perhaps I'll just go ahead and read the question here from Charles. He says that it seems that AI is developing faster than most expected. What is our predictions about how soon AI will reliably perform much of the work we now do as humans, thus dramatically changing the starting point of human work? Will it be able to use AI to make work more enjoyable or reduce the average hours of work? So kind of reframing some of those technological change questions of, can the machines do all the hard stuff and we can start just having fun? Where are we with these things?
I think it will be, these AI systems will be very helpful to us. We cannot totally, as I said, 100% rely on them, but they can be good assistants. We can use them for many things, and writing is a very hard task, as Kyle said. So there are techniques that we are doing research on, how to get what we want without the hallucination, what we want to write to be written without any wrong information. So it will be a big big help in many of our tasks, especially in writing.
Yeah. Great. Another question just kind of came in, sort of asking the general question here from Joyce. I'll just kind of summarize it. Basically, also highlighting some of the inaccuracies, Chita, as you were talking to, that sometimes these systems are the most confidently wrong thing you have ever interacted with, but that it can also respond. So not pulling up information that you want and responding to it. Kind of this idea of, is there an expectation from us as the users or as a stakeholder for these things that these systems will start to learn from us as we use them? Or is that an unreal expectation?
The people who are making these systems, they are actually collecting the data, and they are using that in training the system further. So definitely many of these systems will be learning from these interactions.
Great. Thank you. Any other last comments from our panelists here before we kind of wrap things up?
Well, I think, to the last question, I think one of the things that we need to be careful and pay attention to is like how a Google search function works. Essentially, it shows you what it expects you want to see, rather than necessarily exposes you to a diversity of perspectives on a particular issue that you might be interested in. And so as we look at these large language models and as we interface with them and as they learn, we need to realize that pleasing the user is kind of the baseline expectation, the threshold, because if it doesn't give us a certain amount of what we expect to see, then it will seem, I guess what I would say, the parlor trick doesn't seem quite so impressive at that particular point. Much in the same way that, you can be searching through social media and, Amazon can say, oh, we think you want this particular product. And like, I would never buy that in my entire life. So, this is an opportunity for us to kind of come back with our students and say, let's learn about how these technologies function, because there are baseline assumptions or unstated assumptions associated with them. If we can name those assumptions, then we can start to think critically about them and then engage in the kind of really important work that I think all of us are in the business of, which is ensuring that we're imagining policies, that we're implementing pedagogical strategies that are as accessible and equitable as possible.
Yeah, excellent. Well said. Well, Kyle, Chita, Katina, thank you so much for joining us today. And for all of our audience members, thank you for joining. And on behalf of myself and the entire expert panel with us today, thank you for joining this generative AI teaching conversation. Just want to throw out a real special thank you to Allison Hall and Mackenzie Ramirez, who have been working behind the scenes, making sure that all of this stuff sort of works and keeps us going. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us today. And if you're interested in learning more, please check the events calendar for future webinars and related series. We have another one tomorrow, for example, and we hope to see you there. So thank you very much and have a wonderful evening and a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Son. Good to meet you, Kyle. Bye. Hi, Katina.
Bye.